All right, so today we're diving into some really serious allegations leveled against the Israeli state. We've pulled together information from a bunch of different reports to look at these claims, everything from mass surveillance and information control all the way to violations of international law. We're going to try to get a handle on the full scope of what's being said.
I mean, wow, this quote from a reporter at one of Israel's oldest newspapers, it really cuts to the core of what we're exploring. This is all about the battle over information, right? What you see, what you hear, and, maybe more importantly, what's kept out of sight.
So, where does this kind of control even start? Well, we're kicking things off with a deep dive into the world of technology. Let's pull back the curtain on the unseen machinery of surveillance and see what kind of impact it's having in the real world.
Okay, right at the heart of all this surveillance capability, you've got a group called Unit 8200. Now, according to The Guardian, this is an elite military intelligence agency, and they were running a system so powerful it could scoop up millions of phone calls from Palestinian civilians every single day. Just think about that for a second.
And believe me, it doesn't stop with phone calls, not even close. A report from the 7 a.m. Lee Center lays out a whole toolkit of surveillance tech. We're talking spyware, tools to monitor social media, even biometric surveillance. And here's the kicker. The report alleges that these technologies are often tested out in the occupied Palestinian territory before they get packaged up and sold around the world.
So what happens when this kind of massive surveillance operation gets brought into the light? Well, it caused a huge reaction from one of the biggest tech companies on the planet, and they decided they had to do something about it.
And this was the reason they gave. The Guardian reported that Microsoft's president, Brad Smith, came out with this crystal-clear statement as the company completely cut off Unit 8200's access to its cloud and AI services. The reason? A direct violation of their policies against mass surveillance. Pretty big move.
Okay, so we've looked at the digital side of things, the nuts and bolts of surveillance. But now, let's shift gears and look at how the story itself is controlled. Because, if surveillance is about gathering information, this next part is all about shaping it. The sources we looked at point to two main ways censorship happens in Israeli media. On one hand, you have the official Israeli military censor. This is a state body that literally has the legal power to review and just kill stories before they ever see the light of day. But then there's something more subtle and maybe even more powerful: self-censorship. The Committee to Protect Journalists reports on this pressure for journalists to just avoid certain topics so they don't get branded as traitors. And the result of all this control? It's stark. A report from the Molad think tank found that in the first 6 months of the conflict, a major Israeli news channel dedicated only 3% of its war coverage to even mentioning the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Just 3%. It's not just about controlling what gets reported at home, though. Sources allege there were active campaigns to shape the story for people outside the country. This breakdown, which is based on reporting from the New York Times, shows a covert influence campaign, supposedly commissioned by Israel's Ministry of Diaspora Affairs. We're talking hundreds of fake accounts, posts generated with ChatGPT, all aimed at targeting specific U.S. lawmakers.
All right, let's move on. This next section gets into the most severe claims we found in the source material. And it's really important to be clear here. These aren't our opinions. These are direct claims coming from international human rights organizations and from analyses of official statements.
The word that keeps coming up is apartheid. Now, under international law, that's defined as a crime against humanity. And the sources we reviewed show that major, well-respected organizations, I'm talking about Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, have both published these incredibly detailed reports that conclude Israeli authorities are, in fact, committing this crime.
The source material also focuses a lot on the rhetoric coming from top officials. For instance, take this direct quote from Israel's defense minister. He said this right before imposing a complete siege on Gaza. Genocide scholars, who are cited in these sources, point to this as classic dehumanizing language, the kind of language they argue that paves the way for mass violence.
And here's another example, this one from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He invoked a biblical command to destroy the Amalekites. Commentators looking at this, as cited in the sources, argue that he was basically framing the conflict through what they call a genocidal lens. It's a lens that paints the enemy as something that deserves to be totally destroyed.
And these allegations, they really span across several different areas of international law. The sources lay out claims of collective punishment, which is explicitly forbidden by the Geneva Conventions, the ongoing building of illegal settlements, a crippling siege on Gaza, and the use of what's called disproportionate force, especially when it comes to attacks on civilian sites.
So when you put it all together, the surveillance machine, the control of the narrative, and these incredibly serious allegations, you have to ask, what are the consequences? In our final section, we're going to look at how the world is reacting in the growing push for some kind of accountability.
And that really brings us to a huge question, doesn't it? When all of this stuff comes to light, when these actions are exposed and these allegations are on the table, what happens next? What is the response from institutions, from civil society?
Well, in response, you're seeing civil society organizations calling for real, concrete action. The 7 Emily Center, for one, has a list of recommendations. Stop the harm from surveillance tech, end mass surveillance of innocent people, create new legal frameworks based on human rights, and build real mechanisms for accountability. It's a pretty clear call to stop just talking about the problem and start actively building a solution.
And that really leaves us with this one final massive question. We live at an age where technology makes mass surveillance easier than ever, and where information itself is a weapon. In that world, who holds power to account? I think that question is at the very heart of everything we've just talked about.